Madame LaLaurie stood at the pinnacle of New Orleans society in the 1830s, hosting lavish parties where crystal chandeliers illuminated silk gowns and champagne flowed like water. Born Marie Delphine McCarty on March 19, 1787, she possessed everything the Creole elite valued: beauty, charm, impeccable lineage, and extraordinary wealth. Her father descended from Irish nobility. Her uncle had served as governor of Spanish Louisiana. Her cousin was mayor of New Orleans. The McCartys weren't merely rich, they were woven into the very fabric of the city's power structure. But Delphine's privileged childhood unfolded against a backdrop of terror. When she was only 4 years old, the Haitian Revolution erupted, sending shockwaves of fear through every slaveholding family in the South. Her own uncle had been killed by the people he enslaved. Local uprisings followed: the Mina Conspiracy, the Point Coupé Conspiracy, the massive German coast uprising of 1811, each one tightening the grip of paranoia that defined her world. She married 3 times, each union elevating her status further. At 13, she wed a Spanish officer who died mysteriously in Havana. Her second husband, John Blanc, was a prominent banker who left her wealthy beyond measure when he died in 1816. But it was her third marriage in 1825 to Dr. Leonard Louis Nicolas LaLaurie, a French physician 15 years her junior, that would seal her infamy. By 1832, Madame LaLaurie had completed construction of an elegant neoclassical mansion at 1140 Royal Street, managed entirely in her own name. From this address, she reigned as a paragon of grace and sophistication, known for her charm and refined manners. In public, she appeared polite to Black people, even solicitous of the health of those she enslaved. She had even freed 2 individuals, acts that bolstered her image as a relatively benevolent slaveholder. New Orleans society filled her drawing rooms, drank her wine, and complimented her hospitality. No one suspected that above those glittering chandeliers, in the uppermost rooms of her mansion, something unspeakable was happening. The rumors started before the mansion was even finished. In 1828, Delphine had been investigated for cruelty toward enslaved people, though the court records mysteriously vanished. She paid for legal services and sold several enslaved people in the aftermath, but nothing more came of it. The system bent around her wealth and status, snapping back into place as if nothing had happened. Then, the deaths began. Between 1830 and 1834, funeral registers documented 12 enslaved people dying at the Royal Street Mansion. No causes were recorded, just names in a register, testimony to suffering that would remain forever unspoken. Among them was a woman named Bon, a cook and laundress described as a chronic runaway. Between 1831 and 1833, all 4 of Bon's children died: 10-year-old Florence, 2-year-old Leontine, 13-year-old Juliette, and 6-year-old Jules. Then Bon herself died in February 1833. 5 deaths in one family within 2 years. No explanations given. Neighbors reported seeing haggard, wretched figures in LaLaurie's household, even as she smiled graciously at social gatherings. The whispered stories grew darker, more specific, more horrifying. One tale spread like wildfire through the French Quarter. A young enslaved girl had fallen to her death from the mansion's roof while fleeing punishment. Some said she had been brushing Madame LaLaurie's hair when she hit a snag, triggering a volcanic rage. The child's body was allegedly buried hastily in the courtyard, hidden beneath the elegant garden where guests took evening strolls. This incident prompted an investigation. LaLaurie was found guilty of illegal cruelty and forced to forfeit 9 enslaved people. It should have been a turning point, a moment of accountability that could have prevented what came next. Instead, the LaLauries simply had relatives purchase the 9 individuals on their behalf and smuggled them back into the mansion. The law had spoken, the law had been circumvented, life continued. In 1838, British writer Harriet Martineau collected accounts from New Orleans residents about public rumors of mistreatment at the Royal Street residence. A local lawyer had been dispatched to remind LaLaurie of the laws governing the treatment of enslaved people. During his visit, he found no evidence of wrongdoing. The elegant rooms revealed nothing of what lay above. Stories persisted that LaLaurie kept her cook chained to the kitchen stove, starving her, and beat her own daughters when they tried to offer the woman food. Yet polite society continued to fill her drawing rooms. In the antebellum South, a woman's private dealings with her property were considered precisely that, private. The mansion held its secrets until fire forced them into the light. April 10, 1834, smoke began pouring from the kitchen of the LaLaurie mansion. As firefighters and concerned citizens rushed to the scene, they discovered a 70-year-old enslaved woman chained to the stove by her ankle. The cook made a confession that stopped everyone cold. She had set the fire herself, not to destroy the house, as an attempted suicide. She was terrified of being punished, she explained, because enslaved people taken to the uppermost room of the mansion never came back. The crowd demanded access to the slave quarters to ensure everyone had been evacuated. The LaLauries refused to provide keys. Alarm turned to fury. The doors were broken down. What they found in the attic defied comprehension. 7 people were discovered more or less horribly mutilated, according to the New Orleans Bee, suspended by the neck, with their limbs apparently stretched and torn from one extremity to the other. They had been imprisoned there for months. Judge Jean-Francois Canonge entered and found a woman wearing a spiked iron collar and an elderly woman with a severe head wound, too weak to walk. When Canonge questioned Dr. LaLaurie, he received an insolent reply. Some people had better stay at home rather than come to others' houses to dictate laws and meddle with other people's business. Witnesses added horrifying details: emaciated bodies, evidence of whipping and flaying, restrictive postures suggesting prolonged confinement, iron collars designed to keep heads immobile. The torture chamber had been operating for months, perhaps years, directly above where New Orleans' finest had danced and dined. Word spread with terrifying speed. By April 12th, up to 4,000 people in a city of roughly 50,000 had gathered at the Cabildo jail to view the rescued enslaved people, to convince themselves of their sufferings. The scale of public viewing suggests something beyond morbid curiosity, a city confronting evidence of what many had suspected but none had proven. An enraged mob descended on the Royal Street mansion. They demolished furniture, shattered windows, tore paintings from walls. Sheriff's deputies eventually dispersed the crowd, but by then, scarcely anything remained but the walls. The Pittsfield Sun later reported that 2 of the rescued individuals died shortly after, and that bodies, including that of a child, had been unearthed from the mansion's yard and a condemned well on the grounds. The LaLauries fled. They took a coach to Lake Pontchartrain, traveled by boat to Mobile, Alabama, then sailed to France. No charges were ever filed, no trial ever convened. Delphine LaLaurie would never face legal consequences for what had been discovered in her home. In France, the couple's life unraveled. Dr. LaLaurie eventually left for Cuba, abandoning his wife and never reuniting with her before his death in Havana in 1863. Delphine lived in Paris with her mother and unmarried children from her second marriage. Back in New Orleans, her agent sold the ruined Royal Street mansion for $14,000, less than half its original price, and disposed of her remaining enslaved people. Of the 30 people she had owned at the time of the fire, 11 were sold. This left 19 human beings unaccounted for in the archival record. 19 human beings whose fates remain unknown, who vanished into gaps in documentation, whose stories ended in bureaucratic silence. When Harriet Martineau visited the mansion in 1836, it stood empty and ravaged, a monument to collective rage, but also to the failure of justice. Meanwhile, Delphine LaLaurie lived comfortably in Paris, supported by proceeds from property sales and her considerable inheritance. Her social standing, if diminished, was not destroyed. And then, 8 years after fleeing, she expressed a desire that shocked her family. She wanted to go home. On August 15, 1842, her son, Pauline Blanc, sat down to write a letter to his brother-in-law that would reveal something more chilling than all the horror stories. His mother was determined to return to New Orleans. She was in a bad mood about being kept away. The children had been blocking her return for years, but she remained stubborn, insisting on her right to go back. And then Pauline wrote the sentence that reveals the psychological horror at the story's core. I truly believe that my mother never had any idea concerning the cause of her departure from New Orleans.
How could a woman who forced to flee by boat in the dead of night genuinely not grasp what she had done?
The answer lies not in Delphine LaLaurie's singular monstrosity, but in the terrifying normalcy of a society where human beings were property. Delphine's upbringing had instilled in her the norms of the Creole elite: participation in social events, adherence to established hierarchies, and acceptance of slavery as an integral part of life. In this world, enslaved people existed in a category apart from full humanity. Physical and psychological torment inflicted on them was often justified as necessary for maintaining order. Consider what surrounded her. By the 1820s, New Orleans had become the largest slave trading center in the United States. Families were separated on auction blocks. People were branded, whipped, worked to death. And through it all, Creole society maintained its elaborate codes of conduct, its church attendance, its charitable giving, its claims to Christian virtue. In Delphine's worldview, shaped by decades of this moral architecture, she may genuinely have believed she had done nothing fundamentally wrong. The people in her attic were her property. What she did with her property was her business. The mob's rage, the destruction of her home, the need to flee, these may have registered not as punishment for crimes, but as inexplicable violence against someone of her class and standing. She had been polite in public, she had attended church, she had even freed 2 enslaved people. She just wanted to come home. Perhaps because of declining health and her family's objections, Madame Delphine never made the intended trip. French archives reveal she died on December 7, 1849, at the age of 62. Her funeral took place at the Church of Saint Louis d'Antin in Paris, and she was temporarily interred in the cemetery of Montmartre. In 1851, her remains were exhumed for transportation to New Orleans. Her body, if not her living self, finally returned home. Today, the building at 1140 Royal Street still stands. It has become a staple of ghost tours, where Delphine's story is told with sensational embellishments. Modern retellings often number the dead at close to 100, though funeral registers document 12 deaths and 7 people rescued from the attic. The embellishments transform her into a monster so extreme that she becomes safely distant from the systemic horror that enabled her. The enslaved people who suffered and died, Bonne and her children, Florence, Leontine, Juliette, and Jules, the young girl who fell from the roof, the 7 rescued from the attic, the 19 whose fates remain unknown, become props in a horror narrative rather than human beings whose lives were stolen. The most disturbing truth about Delphine LaLaurie is not that she was a monster, it's that she was a product, a predictable outcome of a society built on the foundational lie that some people are property and not persons. When she bought back the 9 people she'd been forced to forfeit, it wasn't through elaborate schemes, but through ordinary mechanisms of a slave market. And when Delphine LaLaurie, 8 years later and thousands of miles away, genuinely did not understand why she couldn't return home, it wasn't because she was uniquely delusional, it was because the society that raised her, enriched her, and protected her had taught her that enslaved people were not fully real, not fully human, not fully deserving of moral consideration. The delusion of innocence, the ability to inflict suffering and genuinely believe oneself blameless, was not hers alone. It was shared by a civilization that wrote all men are created equal while holding millions in bondage. That capacity for self-deception remains slavery's most enduring and most chilling legacy. Not the spectacular cruelty, but the ordinary self-justification. Not the monster in the mansion, but the society that built the mansion, filled it with guests, and looked away until fire forced their eyes open. And even then, the woman at its center never truly saw what she had done. She just wanted to come home.